do with myself, I resolved to spend the rest of the evening as a looker-on. Presently a rioting noise was heard without. Starting up, the landlord cried, "That's the Grampus's crew. I seed her reported to in the offing this morning. A 3 years' voyage and a full ship. Hurrah, boys! Now we'll have the latest news from the Fijis." A tramping of sea boots was heard in the entry. The door was flung open, and in rolled a wild set of mariners enough, enveloped in their shaggy watch coats and with their heads muffled in woolen comforters, all bedarned and ragged, and their beards stiff with icicles. They seemed an eruption of bears from Labrador. They had just landed from their boat, and this was the first house they entered. No wonder, then, that they made a straight wake for the whale's mouth, the bar, when the wrinkled little old Jonah, there officiating, soon poured them out brimers all around. One complained of a bad cold in his head, upon which Jonah mixed him a pitch-like potion of gin and molasses, which he swore was a sovereign cure for all colds and catarrhs whatsoever. Never mind of how long-standing or whether caught off the coast of Labrador or on the weather side of an ice island. The liquor soon mounted into their heads, as it generally does, even with the Urantus toppers newly landed from sea, and they began capering about most obstreperously. I observed, however, that one of them held somewhat aloof, and though he seemed desirous not to spoil the hilarity of his shipmates by his own sober face, yet upon the whole he refrained from making as much noise as the rest. This man interested me at once, and since the sea gods had ordained that he should soon become my shipmate, though but a sleeping partner one so far as this narrative is concerned, I will here venture upon a little description of him. He stood full 6 feet in height, with noble shoulders, and a chest like a cofferdam. I had seldom seen such brawn in a man. His face was deeply brown and burnt, making his white teeth dazzling by the contrast, while in the deep shadows of his eyes floated some reminiscences that did not seem to give him much joy. His voice at once denounced that he was a Southerner, and from his fine stature I thought he must be one of those tall mountaineers from the Alleghanian Ridge in Virginia. When the revelry of his companions had mounted to its height, this man slipped away unobserved, and I saw no more of him till he became my comrade on the sea. In a few minutes, however, he was missed by his shipmates, and being, it seemed, for some reason a huge favorite with them, they raised a cry of, "Bulkington! Bulkington! Where's Bulkington? Bulkington! Bulkington! Where's Bulkington?" and darted out of the house in pursuit of him. It was now about 9 o'clock, and the room seeming almost supernaturally quiet after these orgies, I began to congratulate myself upon a little plan that had occurred to me just previous to the entrance of the seamen. No man prefers to sleep two in a bed, and in fact, you would a good deal rather not sleep with your own brother. I don't know how it is, but people like to be private when they are sleeping, and when it comes to sleeping with an unknown stranger in a strange inn in a strange town, and that stranger a harpooner, then your objections indefinitely multiply. Nor was there any earthly reason why I, as a sailor, should sleep two in a bed, more than anybody else. For sailors no more sleep two at a bed in sea than bachelor kings do ashore. To be sure, they all sleep together in one apartment, but you have your own hammock, and cover yourself with your own blanket, and sleep in your own skin. The more I pondered over this harpooner, the more I abominated the thought of sleeping with him. It was fair to presume that being a harpooner, his linen or woolen, as the case might be, would not be of the tidiest, certainly none of the finest. I began to twitch all over. Besides, it was getting late, and my decent harpooner ought to be home and going bedwards. Suppose now he should tumble in upon me at midnight. How could I tell from what vile hole he had been coming? Landlord, I've changed my mind about that harpooner. I shan't sleep with him. I'll try the bench here. Just as you please. I'm sorry I can't spare you a tablecloth for a mattress, and it's a plaguey rough board here. Feeling of the knots and notches. But wait a bit, Scrimshander. I've got a carpenter's plane there in the bar. Wait, I say, I'll make ye snug enough. So, saying he procured the plane, and with his old silk handkerchief, first dusting the bench, vigorously set to planing away at my bed, the while grinning like an ape. The shavings flew right and left, till at last the plain iron came bump against an indestructible knot. The landlord was near, spraining his wrist, and I told him, for heaven's sakes, to quit. The bed was soft enough to suit me, and I did not know how all the planing in the world could make eiderdown of a pine plank. So gathering up the shavings, and I did not know how all the planing in the world could make eiderdown of a pine plank. So gathering up the shavings with another grin, and throwing them into the great stove in the middle of the room, he went about his business and left me in a brown study. I now took the measure of the bench, and found that it was a foot too short. But that could be mended with a chair, but it was a foot too narrow, and the other bench in the room was about 4 inches higher than the planed one, so there was no yoking them. I then placed the first bench lengthwise along the only clear space against the wall, leaving a little interval between for my back to settle down in. But I soon found that there came such a draught of cold air over me from under the sill of the window that this plan would never do at all, especially as another current from the rickety door met the one from the window, and both together formed a series of small whirlwinds in the immediate vicinity of the spot where I had thought to spend the night. The devil fetch that harpooner, thought I. The devil fetch that harpooner, thought I. But stop. Couldn't I steal a march on him, bolt his door inside, and jump into his bed, not to be wakened by the most violent knockings? It seemed no bad idea, but upon second thoughts I dismissed it. For who could tell but what the next morning, so soon as I popped out of the room, the harpooner might be standing in the entry, all ready to knock me down. Still looking around me again, and seeing no possible chance of spending a sufferable night unless in some other person's bed, I began to think that after all, I might be cherishing unwarrantable prejudices against this unknown harpooner. Thinks I'll wait a while. He must be dropping in before long. I'll have a good look at him then, and perhaps we may become jolly good bedfellows after all. There's no telling. But though the other boarders kept coming in by ones, twos, and threes and going to bed, yet no sign of my harpooner. Landlord, said I, what sort of chap is he? Does he always keep such late hours? It was now hard upon 12 o'clock. The landlord chuckled again with his lean chuckle, and seemed to be mightily tickled at something beyond my comprehension. No, he answered. Generally he's an early bird. Early to bed and early to rise. And yes, he's the bird that catches the worm. But tonight he went out a-peddling, you see. And I don't see what on earth keeps him so late, unless, maybe, he can't sell his head. Can't sell his head? What sort of bamboozingly story is this you were telling me? Getting into a towering rage. Do you pretend to say, landlord, that this harpooner is actually engaged this blessed Saturday night, or rather Sunday morning, in peddling his head around this town? That's precisely it, said the landlord. And I told him he couldn't sell it here. The market's overstocked. With what? shouted I. With heads, to be sure? Ain't there too many heads in the world? I tell you what it is, landlord, said I quite calmly. You'd better stop spinning that yarn to me. I'm not green. Maybe not. Taking out a stick and whittling a toothpick. But I rather guess you'll be done brown if that air harpooner hears you a slandering his head. I'll break it for him, said I, now flying into a passion again at this unaccountable farrago of the landlord's. It's broke already, said he. Broke, said I. Broke, do you mean? Certain. And that's the very reason he can't sell it, I guess. Landlord, said I, going up to him as cool as Mount Hecla in a snowstorm. Landlord, stop whittling. You and I must understand one another, and that too without delay. I come to your house and want a bed. You tell me that you can only give me half of one, that the other half belongs to a certain harpooner. And about this harpooner, whom I have not yet seen, you persist in telling me the most mystifying and exasperating stories, tending to beget in me an uncomfortable feeling towards the man whom you designed for my bedfellow, a sort of connection, landlord, which is an intimate and confidential one in the highest degree. I now demand of you to speak out and tell me who and what this harpooner is, and whether I shall be in all respects safe to spend the night with him. And in the first place, you will be so good as to unsay that story about selling his head, which if true, I take to be good evidence that this harpooner is stark mad. And I've no idea of sleeping with a madman. And you, sir, landlord, you, sir, by trying to induce me to do so knowingly, would thereby render yourself liable to a criminal prosecution. Well, said the landlord, fetching a long breath, that's a pretty long sermon for a chap that rips a little now and then. But be easy. This here harpooner, I've been telling you, has just arrived from the South Seas, where he bought up a lot of balmed New Zealand heads. Great curious, you know, and he sold all of them out on them. But one, he sold all on them with one. And that one he's trying to sell tonight, because tomorrow's Sunday. And it would not do to be selling human heads about the streets when folks is going to churches. He wanted to last Sunday, but I stopped him just as he was going out of the door with 4 heads strung on a string for all the earth like a string of onions. This account cleared up the otherwise unaccountable mystery and showed that the landlord, after all, had no idea of fooling me. But at the same time, what could I think of a harpooner who stayed out of a Saturday night clean into the Holy Sabbath, engaged in such a cannibal business as selling the heads of dead idolaters, adulterers, idolaters. Depend on it, landlord, that harpooner is a dangerous man.